On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
After 2 straight wins, the Chicago Bears are in this kind of unfamiliar place for Bears fans, at least in recent history, where it feels like the team is playing pretty well, obviously good enough to win these games, but also it feels like there's so much room for improvement and seemingly clear paths towards where that improvement should come from. This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm an analyst for Pro Football Focus, and I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for more Bears talk. And also make sure you subscribe to the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Today's episode brought to you by RockAuto.com. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit RockAuto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen each and every day. We're here for you 5 days a week, and appreciate everyone who's coming back and tuning in for each of our episodes every week. It's a fun way to get more on your Bears team. And on the show today, we're looking at growth. We have a growth mindset for this Bears team. This weird feeling of hope that we haven't always felt around this team. We'll start with the defense. Some of the things Sean Desai is doing schematically to help them stay one step ahead of opposing offenses. We'll hear from head coach Matt Nagy on sort of the effects that has on the defense. And we'll go through at least a couple of examples without having gone through the full All-22 film yet of some of what Sean Desai is doing. We'll touch base briefly on the senior defensive assistant Mike Pettine, who happened to be the Packers defensive coordinator, and this idea about, okay, how much can the Bears actually get from having the Packers former defensive coordinator on the coaching staff as they get ready for this week in Green Bay. And then we'll circle back to this Bears offense and some different areas where we should see progress and growth from them moving forward to help this offense get to even another level beyond what we're seeing so far with Justin Fields and a strong running game. But I think we need to start with this Bears defense because I don't know that Sean Desai is getting enough credit or enough. It hasn't been enough said or talked about the job he's doing with this defense right now. Not that he's been a perfect defensive coordinator by any means, but he's getting creative and doing some things with this group up front and formationally, personnel-wise, and schematically on the back end that I think has been impressive and has been a breath of fresh air from the Chuck Pagano era. And I think Chuck Pagano has too easily made the scapegoat for the problems that this defense had over the last couple of seasons. And it's not as simple as Desai has fixed all the problems and Chuck Pagano was the cause of all the problems. But we should still give Sean Desai credit for the things he's doing to be creative with his defense in some ways that Fangio was creative with his defense, in some ways that Sean Desai is really putting his own flavor, I think, on this defense and this specific group of personnel that he has. Because that's the thing. It's not the 2018 defense. It's not the 2020 defense. There's some different personnel and some different players in there that can do different things and have different strengths and weaknesses that are always going to make it a slightly different flavor. But Desai is really doing a good job of making it his flavor and making it then difficult on opposing offenses to keep up with. And I think, well, Matt Nagy as head coach is never going to get into like real specifics of X's and O's and give away things that might be schematic advantages. I think he did a pretty good job of painting a picture of exactly sort of the effect that has and what he's seeing from the head coach position, especially now that he's not so busy calling the offensive plays and he's at least not involved in the defensive play calling, but more in tune and present in what's going on both sides of the ball on game day.
Not about Sean's game plan. I mean, we saw some things we haven't really seen from that defense, just scheme-wise. I know you can't get into the details of what struck you about what he created for yesterday.
Yeah, I again, just being on the headset and listening to him, I thought he was really on to being able to see where they were at and predict what they were going to do, and that's a credit to that whole coaching staff and Sean just really looking into it, and because that's a great offensive scheme. And great players, and so they do a lot of different things, and they got a lot of different weapons. But I just feel like, big picture, he had a good feel on how he wanted that thing to go, and he stuck to it. He stayed patient throughout in different ways, and I think it's impressive. We had that week 1 against the Rams. That was a tough game, and I really believe that he's done a great job of again, kind of building that identity on defense. And once you get that and you start really believing what you guys are doing together, it works. It's good.
So there's a specific example of this that I want to point to from the game. And so far, it's early enough in this week where we don't have the all 22 film yet from the Bears win over the Raiders. And I still want to go through that more in depth to be able to break things down and see a little bit more of what the safeties are doing on the back end when they're off the screen on the broadcast version. But in this game against the Raiders, when you have a tight end as good as Darren Waller, right, it requires some potential extra defensive attention there and some different things to counteract that in certain ways, or just be prepared for certain things from the Raiders offense. And so one of the things we saw Sean Desai go to early in this game and kind of come back to, for me, it starts first and foremost at the safety position and what they've been doing with DeAndre Houston Carson. We saw them rotate in Deion Bush and Tashawn Gibson kind of back and forth, with Gibson coming off an injury, but Houston Carson has been kind of the dime safety. They'll come in with 6 defensive backs. They'll come in, but they brought him in for like a 3 safety package with the nickel package. So instead of having Duke Shelley as a slot cornerback, they brought in DeAndre Houston Carson, not as a slot cornerback, but to allow them to be more flexible with the safeties. And there was a play early in this game you can go find. I think it was a 2nd and 1 on one of the early drives for the Raiders, where the Bears go to this 6-1 front, where they have 6 guys in the line of scrimmage and 1 linebacker behind him. That's a wrinkle that Vic Fangio put in that was eventually used by the Patriots to beat the Rams in the Super Bowl and shut down their defense, or their offense that was borrowed by the Patriots, but sort of originated with Vic Fangio in that 2018 season. The formation itself, not brand new from Sean Desai, but what Desai did with the personnel in his 6, from left to right, it was Eddie Jackson down on the line of scrimmage, almost like an outside linebacker at the safety position. And then I think it was Jeremiah Atauchu at defensive end, Angelo Blackson, the defensive lineman, at defensive tackle. And then I don't remember another defensive lineman. I don't remember if it was Bilal Nichols or who it was at the other defensive line spot. Then it was Travis Gibson at defensive end. And then outside of Travis Gibson was Alec Ogletree. So the 6 guys in the line of scrimmage are a safety, an edge rusher, 2 defensive linemen, another edge rusher, and then an inside linebacker, with Roquan Smith as your one off-ball linebacker in the 6-1. And then you still have Houston Carson and Tashawn Gibson as your 2 deep safeties. So you have 7 men in the box, 6 on the line of scrimmage to try and stop the run, but also 1 as a safety. So you can cover Darren Waller, the tight end, and still have 2 deep safeties to take away the deep shots over the top of the field. It really gives the Bears so much defensive flexibility to be able to have like your 2-4-5 nickel package, but still a 6-1 front to be physical against the running game, but have enough light personnel in there to be able to cover tight ends. It was a 12 personnel for the Raiders offense, 2 tight ends, 1 running back, 2 wide receivers. So they could counteract heavier offensive personnel, but still have coverage players in to cover a dynamic receiving tight end like Darren Waller, and still have 2 deep safeties and 7 men in the box in your nickel package. It really was the perfect mix of clever creativity and putting different players in new positions where the offense has to kind of just to figure, okay, who's lined up on the defensive line here, and who's the linebacker, and where's there going to be space against this coverage? And really, I think, is the answer, or a potential answer, not a perfect solution, but an answer to the modern NFL with these athletic tight ends that are impossible to cover and give offenses so much flexibility. Sean Desai found a pretty darn good response there to fight back against the modern NFL offensive innovation. I really am looking forward to getting into the all-22 film and seeing how it sort of all cooperated on the back end. But just one specific example there of some of the things Matt Nagy was talking about defensively. We'll see what they might put in there against Aaron Rodgers to try and confuse him, and without trying to make things too difficult on your defense. It's going to be in a tough matchup, but they have the former Packers defensive coordinator for some advanced intel. So we'll hear from Matt Nagy on what they expect to be able to get out of Mike Pettine and how they balance that. And we'll talk about those different dynamics of just how much of an advantage is it to have the former Packers coach on the Bears staff next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears brought to you by our friends at BetOnline.ag, the number one place we recommend and the number one place we trust for all your sports betting needs, not just pro football, but college football, baseball playoffs, NBA season right around the corner, plus soccer, tennis, boxing, hockey, golf. If it's a sport, they've got it at betonline.ag. Right now, Bears Packers are Bears plus 4.5 as the underdogs against Green Bay at home. The money line is Bears plus 185 as the underdogs, and the over-under set at 45. So expecting some scoring, not an over-the-top shootout, but not a boring, low-scoring game either. If you want to put some money down and make this game even more exciting, BetOnline.ag is the place to do it. Sign up today for a free account. Enter our promo code LOCKEDON and receive your free 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit, giving you even more money to play with at BetOnline.ag, your online sportsbook experts. So it's easy to make the correlation and say, well, the Bears have the Packers defensive coordinator of the last few seasons on their coaching staff. So they should have all the answers on this Packers defense, and they should have a lot of the answers on this Packers offense because he's been coaching against them and he's been coaching these players, and he's been the guy in charge of that Packers defense, albeit a Packers defense that struggled and that many Packers fans were definitely ready to move on from the defensive coordinator. Glad to see him go. Glad to see a replacement brought in. A replacement, by the way, that comes from the Vic Fangio tree through Brandon Staley in Los Angeles, but from that same coaching tree, running some similar things to what the Bears defense does currently, which is a separate dynamic in this matchup that from the Mike Pettine situation. But I was glad the Chicago media asked Matt Nagy pretty specifically, like, is this a real thing? Do you actually get that much advantage from having Mike Pettine on this defensive coaching staff? And of course, Nagy's not going to come out and say, oh yeah, he gave us all the Packers secrets. We're in the clear. We've got this all figured out and we're going to destroy them. No, he was a little bit vague or wishy-washy about it, but I think we can read between the lines a little bit here and find some of the truth and some of the parts that might be a little bit exaggerated by the fan base that's eager to say, oh yeah, this should be a huge advantage. Here's how the head coach is approaching it.
Man, how much can Mike Pettine help you this week? Because a lot of times it seems like that's overblown.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, sometimes maybe there's things he could do that you wouldn't even want to say.
Right.
What's real about that situation this week?
Sure, I think there's a balance to it. They obviously understand that's you always, as coaches, you look at people that are familiar to the staffs that you're playing against. So that's normal for every team. And obviously with him being there the last several years as their D coordinator, there's a balance to it, so he'll have his input on what he sees and what he thinks and that sort of thing. But, we definitely want to, if we think it's something that we want to use, we're obviously going to use it.
The idea that a guy like that might knows their personnel well enough to know where a weakness is, has that ever been a factor in a game, in that kind of situation? Is that a real thing, I guess?
Well, I would say, so if you're just using Coach Pettine as an example, the fact of the experience he has at the NFL level, forget the team that he came from. He's got a lot of valid points and ideas, so that part's been great with him. Now you just put in, now you sprinkle in the fact that this is the former defensive coordinator that we've gone against for, since I've been here the last 3 years. So, you're going to use things that he has, and, he's been able to go against their offense and that quarterback in general for the whole time. So there might be some things that you got to be careful. You start getting into the whole thing of this and that, and then before you know it, you're into. I mean, he'll do a good job of helping us out in certain things, and we just balance it.
So Nagy talks in a lot of generalities there and about this and that, and using these sort of not pronouns, but filler words of balancing these things and not really saying specifically what the things are that he's talking about. I think the point he's trying to make there is that, yes, Mike Pettine can tell them some things about some players and some scheme stuff, but if you rely on that to be your whole plan, chances are Green Bay is not going to do everything exactly the same as they always did under Mike Pettine, and you could find yourself maybe preparing for the wrong things or relying too much on that information that is dated. I mean, every team changes a lot of things from year to year and updates their terminology, and now a new defensive coordinator, of course, is going to update a lot of what they're going to do defensively. And, Matt LaFleur's offense, I get him and his brother mixed up. Matt LaFleur's offense is going to be, there's always going to be slightly new variations and new personnel in there, just like a lot of things we just talked about with the Bears defense and how Sean Desai, mixes some things up for there. So I do think, generally speaking, the idea for any team, whether it's Pettine and the Packers or other coaching staffs having former coaches from former teams, I think it tends to be a little bit overblown from the fan base and the outside world for a few different reasons. I think, first of all, NFL teams have enough film and analytics to generally have a pretty good sense of what opposing teams are going to try and do to them in any given game. Whether you have that coach on your staff or not, You're going to watch the last, 5 games of the Green Bay Packers offense, and you're going to generally know what types of throws, what types of routes they tend to run, what types of running plays they type to run. And you have enough tape to be able to generally understand guys' strengths and weaknesses. You can see, okay, their backup center is struggling with anchoring, for example, against bull rushes. And you'll see, okay, this cornerback bites on double moves, right? There's enough tape out there to be able to glean most of those things anyway. So Mike Pettine may have some intel on what Kevin King is good and bad at, the Packers cornerback, for example. I don't know how much more intel that is that you can't just already see on tape. Same thing, with like Aaron Rodgers and the offense, right? I mean, you can kind of know what their scheme is and generally what they're going to do. And it comes down to, your guys, because your guys knowing what they might try and do, but you're not going to know exactly when they call which plays, right? So you might recognize it as the play is developing or afterwards say, oh, I know that play and look for it later. But if you don't know what the play call is right as they're snapping the ball, you can pick up little tendency things here and there, but it's not going to be like you have this cheat sheet of like, okay, Packers are calling this right now, and I know how to defend it with that. It's just you can't know unless you're literally on their sideline listening to their play calls in their headset. So there's a little bit of that aspect, and I think some of it too is just that there's not enough to glean from the defensive coordinator who was there a couple of years ago, because there's no secret to stopping Aaron Rodgers. There's no secret to covering Davante Adams, right? I mean, they're just really, really talented players, and you have to be talented and stay one step ahead. And so I think you're going to see enough of both of these teams that come out and say they're going to throw these other wrinkles in there that every team does each week. You throw something new at the opposing offense or defense that they haven't seen on tape yet. And Mike Pettine's not going to be able to prepare the Bears for something the Packers haven't put on tape yet, because he won't know what they're going to do that's brand new, right? He's not in the organization anymore. So there's some advantage to him probably knowing the ins and outs of a few players' strengths and weaknesses a little bit more than others, where he can confirm things you see on tape or say, oh, no, that you might have seen that on tape earlier this season from that player having that issue, but that's not something I experienced with him, so don't necessarily rely on that. He'll know when something on tape is a trend and when something on tape is a little bit more of an aberration. And I think he makes it a little bit easier. I don't think you have to work as hard. You might not have to go as in-depth on as much tape because he might just already know some of those things, but I don't know that it's brand new information that he's going to glean. The terminology is going to be different. So he can't come out there and say, oh yeah, when they say Omaha at the line of scrimmage, it means X, Y, or Z, because even like when Peyton Manning would do that, they would change what Omaha means. So the defense couldn't always just pick up on key words necessarily and know what it is. And even when you do start to know or pick up on little things, you still have to beat them at it. You still have to be better than them and be more talented at those specific positions. And certainly Bears pass rushers, for example, some of the Bears linebackers, right? They can be more talented, but Davante Adams versus Kindle Vildor is always going to be a mismatch in the Packers' favor, even if Vildor knows what route Davante Adams is going to run. I mean, Aaron Rodgers is still going to trust Davante Adams in some of those same ways. And then you throw in that there's going to be different personnel that Mike Pettine doesn't know. And it's a little bit of an overblown narrative. Again, there is value to it. It's not useless. It's not the same value as any other defensive coach. There is something to be said there. But I don't think it's the difference between winning and losing. I don't think it's a game-changing value to having specifically him helping you scout the Packers. I think in the same sense that he gives you value as a senior defensive assistant against any team for just having knowledge of the NFL and scheme, I think there's slightly more that he gives you against the Packers. But again, it's not going to be the difference between the Bears winning and losing this game. It's going to come down to defense playing at a high level, Desai staying creative and staying one step ahead of the Packers offense, like we just talked about. And of course, this Bears offense continuing to stick with its identity while making some progress in what it's going to do and opening things up a little bit more as they get more comfortable and as things just start to get a little bit more up to speed with Justin Fields and with what they're going to do with Bill Lazor as the play caller. We'll go a little bit more specifically on what the Bears offense can do to grow and where we want to see that progress from week to week while still sticking to the running game and that offensive identity next on Locked On Bears. I think for both sides of the ball for Chicago, there's a lot of different moving parts that have helped them stay ahead of the curve right now. And nobody knows more about moving parts than our friends at RockAuto.com. They're a family business that have been serving auto parts customers online for over 20 years. They got anything you could possibly need for your vehicle. It's the deepest catalog you can find anywhere. So many different parts. Some parts I don't fully understand, a fuel pump assembly and an engine control module, but easy stuff too, like tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. If you need it for your vehicle, rockauto.com has it. And I love how easy it is to navigate their online catalog. You just enter in your car's make and model, and then boom, it pulls up all the different parts available for your vehicle. And then you can sort between the brands you prefer, the specifications for your specific year and model, and then, of course, the prices as well, because rockauto.com's prices are the same for everybody. Unlike some of the chain stores that'll have different price tiers if you're a professional mechanic versus a do-it-yourselfer like us, rockauto.com's price is the same for everybody. So don't spend up to twice as much for the same parts somewhere else. Head on over to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. When you check out, fill out their box. It says, "How did you hear about us?" and write in the words "locked on." That way they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We've seen the parts of this Bears offense really start to come together in now back-to-back starts for Justin Fields, or I guess sort of 3 straight starts, but back-to-back wins for Justin Fields as your Bears starter. Obviously, the Lions are the Lions, and the Raiders, as it turns out, we're going through a lot more with John Gruden than we realized, and I'd be remiss to not condemn everything that's come out about the emails and things that John Gruden has said. It just very clearly not a high-quality individual leading that organization. And the reporting came out that the Raiders got those emails on Friday before the Bears game, and he coached that game with the team fully knowing the full contents of all the racist, sexist, homophobic, misogynistic, and otherwise awful, offensive things that Gruden has repeatedly said in emails throughout his career, it seems, based on everything that was coming out there. So, maybe there was more going on with the Raiders than we realized. It wasn't as though the Bears got John Gruden fired. John Gruden got fired because he's a bad person, right? I mean, that's just through and through. Just because it was in private emails is a very clear reflection of who he is as an individual. And I can't imagine what Carl Nassib had gone through on the Las Vegas Raiders locker room and with him as his head coach. I can't imagine. I feel for them, but I'm glad the organization is able to move on and do the right thing and cut bait now and just get rid of it and move on. That's beside the point. So, but the point I was getting to there is that as that went a little bit to the news of the day was that maybe the Raiders weren't as high quality of an opponent as we thought they would be. And the Lions certainly weren't a high quality opponent. The Packers are going to be a real test for this Bears team. And I don't know that too many Bears fans are expecting a Justin Fields to outduel Aaron Rodgers necessarily this early in his career, but I think we're seeing the offensive progress trending in this right direction of now you found an identity, build off of that without losing that identity. This team still needs to run the ball and be very run focused and sort of build the passing game off of some of that running game. And the structure, more than anything else, is founded on that ground game. But there are limitations there. And when you play a team, I know the Packers have had their struggles as well this season, but when you start to play some of the better contending teams in the NFL, you might need more than Khalil Herbert and Damian Williams running the ball behind an offensive line that played well against the Raiders, but has very real concerns on that offensive line. And so Matt Nagy knows that. And he understands, I mean, as much as we want to hate on Matt Nagy and not give him the benefit of the doubt of anything, he's not a complete moron. And he understands a lot about offensive football, even if maybe he's not the best play caller for the Bears based on how this team is right now. But he senses that need to grow. And I think they're in a very good position to do so, especially now that we already have this baseline of a pretty high level of offensive play. Here's how Matt Nagy sees the situation moving forward.
Matt, you've mentioned a couple times about establishing an offensive identity in the last couple weeks. How different is this identity from your vision of the offense when you came here?
No, I think you adapt to really your personnel that you have, and to every year could be a little bit different. I think you see that with some offenses as they grow and as they get to certain things. And so what I like is that I think we have a really good mix right now within our offense of ways to be able to get to things. If they shut something down, we're able to get to it because we have some multiplicity within the offense. So I'm good with it. I like it.
In that regard, it seems like, I guess I'm curious, how much room is there for expansion? And without giving away details, how much room is there for expansion? Because from yesterday to my untrained eye, I guess it just seemed like the emphasis on protection and the run game, it came at a cost of wide receivers and tight ends becoming a factor in the passing game. And so is there room with what you're doing now to expand it? And
no, there's always room, and that's what I talked about with you guys yesterday is, you're always trying to stay one step ahead of the defenses, however that is. And so maybe some games there's some play actions off of that are more successful than others. Maybe it's drop back, or maybe it's RPO, or it's getting out on the edge with movements and nakeds. I think it's all based off of the things that you see that a team is going to come into. Like for instance, they had a plan yesterday of trying to defeat us in certain areas, and we saw that and adjusted to it. And so every week you're going to have that, and we got to figure out what it is. And so they may try to take some things away. To your general question is, when you create an identity, you stick to it. And when you know that that's who you are, you can agree to understand that you're going to win. You're going to win and lose, but you know when you win and lose, when you're doing it with an identity. So the growth part of that is us being able to schematically grow and continue to change things up.
Is that concept easier, frankly, for you to get now in your fourth year than maybe in earlier?
Yeah, I think just with all of us as a staff, just everybody talking through like what our players do best, and then how does that fit, and again, the target stuff with who's getting the ball and all this stuff. Like, our guys just want to win, and whatever that is, however we do it, but let's do it knowing how we're going to do it. And so once we figure that out, which I feel like we're doing a good job of creating that identity, now we got to build off of that. And that's the part where we got to stay advanced with that. But yeah, we got to be smart and be able to still let our players play fast.
So I think when we look at where this Bears offense can start to go from here a little bit, we didn't see as explosive of a passing game against the Raiders as they did against the Lions, and they didn't necessarily need to be. I mean, they got up to the 14-point, or they got their 2 touchdowns and had the lead there for a while with some comfort. So they didn't need to be passing and opening up things up downfield. But when you start playing against teams like Green Bay and some of the better teams coming up here on the schedule, that might become a little bit more of a necessity. And it's not always going to be as easy as it was against the Detroit Lions. And you do get to give the Raiders some credit there for shutting down some of what the Bears wanted to do vertically. It felt like Justin Fields, when he didn't have a lot of those plays where he had a lot of time and a long, clean pocket to be able to let some of those routes develop a little bit more downfield. They took some quick, deep shots, and he wasn't able to connect the way he was against the Lions, in part because things were better covered against the better defense, which is part of the point here, right? Is that part of this does fall on the offensive line, part of it does fall on the receivers, part of it's on the play calling and the scheme for receivers to get open, but you need to be able to string together some more explosive plays, particularly in the passing game, while not getting away from the running game. Because I think it's that combination to be able to wear teams down with 4 yards here, 5 yards there, 3 yards there, and pick up first downs in short down and distances and stay ahead of the sticks in that regard, and then mix in the 25-yarder to Darnell Mooney across the middle of the field, or the vertical shot to Allen Robinson down the sideline, or wherever you might be. Like, you start to get some of those back in, like in the Lions game, and then you incorporate the tight ends a little bit more up the middle of the field, and you can start to really feel like you have this robust offensive attack. It's felt like most of this passing offense, when there have been downfield plays, have gone through Darnell Mooney, and then to a lesser extent Allen Robinson, but that's kind of been it, right? It hasn't felt like, and not that it should feel like the Chiefs' offense by any means, but it hasn't felt like those dynamic passing games where it's like it could go to any of these receivers anywhere on the field and really open things up and always leave the defense completely guessing on when and where and what it's going to be. The Bears don't need to be that yet, but that's sort of the direction you would like to trend towards while still running the ball and being able to work play action off of that, and then make the play action that much more deadly when you can, kind of sink the tight ends in behind the linebackers and get some of those easy yards over the middle of the field instead of having to rely on, the curls and the slants. And those have worked the last couple of games. Will they work against some of the higher quality defenses? To be determined. I don't know that the Packers right now have one of those higher quality defenses. So it's not this immediate need of like things are wrong and you got to get better right away. No, not at all. For me, it's more about the anticipation, the excitement, and the hope of how much better this Bears offense still has so much more room to continue to get better. And it's already playing at a pretty decent level, in part because the talent of your quarterback to convert a tough 3rd and 12 throw late in that game, to be able to stick with the running game and pick up 3rd and short situations and be consistent in moving the ball, then to be able to extend plays with his legs and get that more involved over time. Right? You can see all the different little areas where it's like, oh yeah, they could do a little bit more of that, and they could do a little bit more of that, and they could get those receivers involved and the tight ends and running backs in the screen game, and little Texas routes over the middle, and then Justin Fields' legs we haven't really seen yet become a big part of this offense. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's a lot more that they can do here. They don't need to do it right away, and they don't need to open everything up and jump into all those things right away. It comes back to a concept and an idea that I think of, that I associate with Bill Belichick, and I'm not making any comparisons here between Nagy and Bill Belichick by any way, shape, or form. Do not get that confused. But there's this idea with the Patriots that the Patriots don't try and score as many points as possible. They just try and score more points than you. They don't want to show you everything. They don't want to show you all their cards and do whatever it takes and throw everything on the table to get as many points as they can. They just want to show as little as possible to still beat you. And it's a very tough balance to know, okay, you don't want to reveal all your cards and you want to be as conservative as possible while still scoring enough points and winning without, holding yourself back and leaving too much out there. And I think that's kind of where I'm at with this Bears offense right now, is don't unload your whole bag of tricks and fire all your fireworks off at the same time for a big grand finale to score as many points as you can. No, you don't need to. You just need to score one more point than the opponent. And with a running game that's working right now, an offensive line that seems to be finding some rhythm behind the running game and making things easier on your rookie quarterback, that's then doing enough in those critical situations to make those plus plays, that's a winning formula. And you just have to make sure that as the quality of opponent gets better, you might have to let out a little bit more. You don't let out everything, but you let out a little bit more to keep staying one step ahead. But you don't need to jump 5 steps ahead right away. You save that for the playoffs. In the Super Bowl, you put it all out there, sure. But you work your way up there slowly but surely. And I think there's this, I'm hesitant to get too far ahead of myself and too encouraged, but it has been just 2 wins against teams that are not necessarily going to be contenders at this point in the season. But you can feel a little bit better about the immediate direction of where this offense is going. And also, like we talked about at the beginning of this episode, where this defense is going. So let's enjoy it, because it's not always going to be this positive feeling. There's going to be some more losses, I'm sure, along the way. The Bears are going to play some better teams, and they're not going to play as well. And maybe we'll get back to torches and pitchforks and getting the mob ready. But in the meantime, let's try and enjoy where we are right now. I hope the Locked On Bears podcast is helping you enjoy a little bit of 2 Bears wins and where this team is feeling like the future is bright with Justin Fields. So I hope you'll keep tuning in. Keep coming back for more of our daily in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis available for you free and on all platforms. So appreciate everyone who listens, no matter where you listen. Making us your first listen every day is a great way to get into that rhythm, especially those that are commenting and liking on the YouTube channel and joining in the conversation there as well. I think it just adds another layer to this, whether it's in the Locked On Bears Facebook group or in the YouTube comments, to have a conversation around the podcast, commingle with your fellow Chicago Bears fans, and of course, have a much better time making it easier to bear down.